I have to switch to the phone
Yeah.
data or whatever, and that might take some time.
Yeah, sir, we are ready to start. We can.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the 7th edition of the workshop series, Self, Love and Care, organized by Vidya. But before we start the program today, there is some sad news. A benefactor of ours, Ankur Bhatia, executive director of the Bird Group of Travels, suddenly passed away last night. So we wish fortitude for the family, and we wish the family strength to come to deal with this terrible crisis in their hour of tragedy. Let us all fold our hands in silent prayer for half a minute in memory of the departed soul. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Now, today's theme or topic is creative expression in you, or rather creative writing in you.
It'll be very nice if you can ask everyone to mute their mics, please.
May I request all audience members to mute their mics, please?
Sir, please unmute. Sir, you are also on mute. Sir?
Should I start again?
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the 7th edition of the workshop series, Self-Love and Care, organized by Vidya. The topic for today's webinar is Creative Writing and You. This session will be conducted by an eminent personality who herself is a master, or dare I say mistress, in the field of creative expression through her paintings as well as her writings. But before I formally introduce her, permit me to make a few initial introductory remarks on the topic. Creative expression in you. What is creative expression or creative writing? Creative writing can be anything that you write that goes beyond the parameters of factual writing. It is not professional writing, it is not journalistic writing, it is not academic writing, it's not writing on topic, technical matters. Creative writing really is a flight of fancy. It deals less with reality and more with the imagination. And the creative truth is the truth imagined by the writer. Creative writing, therefore, is more in the nature of fiction than fact. Now, having said that, it is not as if creative writing or expression ignores or is totally divorced from facts or reality. It is only that the creative artist sees reality in a new and different way, and from a perspective that has not been seen before. Now, to elucidate my point, let me take recourse to a painting by the famous Dutch painter Vincent van Gogh. Look at his painting, Starry Night. Maybe you have the image of the painting. Just look at his, yes. Look at the way he's looking at the night sky. Did anyone before him look at the night sky in this manner? Isn't his vision totally new and strange and bizarre and fascinating? And more importantly, what is this painting telling us about the night sky? What is it telling us about the mind of the painter and the way he looks at things? This is what is creativity all about. Very often, the lines between the factual and the creative may blur. Just to give you a few examples, very prosaic examples, some writers write very creatively about food, which is so commonplace. And then there are writers who write so interestingly about travel, about real life journeys and trips. And of course, there are writers who make subjects like boring and dull subjects like electricity, or technical subjects like electricity, or histories, the Second World War come alive through creative expression. Once again, let me give you another example. For example, I'm presently reading a book, The Splendid and the Vile. It is a book on the Battle of Britain, a non-fiction account of the British Prime Minister's Churchill's leadership during the period when, after having conquered most of Europe, Hitler launched a massive aerial blitz on Britain, and how in this hour of grave national emergency, the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill rallied the people together and fought the Nazis so bravely. Now, this is factual history, but creatively and imaginatively told. It is not dry, it is not scholastic, it is not academic, it's not technical. It is narrated like a story unfolding, and the reader is spellbound by the narrative. Creative writing really is saying or writing about something in a way that is new, innovative, fresh, and creatively imagined. The subject matter of creative writing could be anything, as I said. It could be something commonplace. It's not what you're writing about that is important, but how you express it. The subject matter, like I said, could be, for example, a topic like the street in front of my house, or my grandmother, or a trip I made into the hills, right? Now, these are all, like they say in Hindi, ghisa pitta, but not really. If you write about them in an interesting, in a engaging manner, so long as it is refreshing, it is attention grabbing, not boring or dull, or not something that you've heard before, that is what is creative writing. In fact, it is not surprising that one of the highest expressions of creative writing is the novel, right? And the word novel itself means that which is new, original, and innovative. A good novel tells a story in a way that has never been told before. And creative writing is the ability to communicate interestingly so as to engage the attention of the reader or the listener who's been told something new that she has never heard before. Creative writing involves two important human faculties. Number one, language, a facility with the use of words. You have to be passionate about the written word, about writing. So you must be a reader. You should observe how good writers use language, and you should endeavor to express and write yourselves. Writing is a craft involving certain techniques that can be taught and learned, like the use of literary tropes, for example, irony or metaphor or idiom or pathetic fallacy. As with everything else, practice makes it perfect. But while language is important, there's another even more vital component of creative expression. Above all, creative writing is about developing and cultivating your human imagination. It is your imagination that will unleash your creative potential. Your imagination that is free and unfettered. Your imagination that is rich and varied. Your imagination that is fertile. Your imagination that is bold. Your imagination that is out of the box. Your imagination that is not confined by tradition or society or convention or dull habit. In fact, an imagination that welcomes, quote unquote, the other, the outsider. An imagination that embraces difference, that is not scared of difference. An imagination that is non-conformist and revolutionary. For example, like the imagination of a child. A child has a wonderful, fantastic imagination. Unfortunately, as we grow up, we are constantly instructed to live in the real world. We are told not to have our heads in the clouds. And gradually, with the passage of time, a child loses that vivid imagination that he is born with or she is born with. The best creative writers are like children, those who've not lost their childlike sense of wonder. They let their imagination run wild. They are not prisoners of dull routine or habit or conditioning. They are fascinated by the new, the exotic, the strange, even the bizarre, and the outlandish. It's not surprising, therefore, that the most popular children's book of all time, which is also a favorite of many adults, is Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland is a book filled with bizarre and fantastical creatures like the Mad Hatter, the Cheshire Cat, the Queen of Hearts, Tweedledum and Tweedledee, and Jabberwocky. So it's important to cultivate an imagination and then transmute your imagination into a painting or an essay or a narrative. Kierkegaard, the existentialist philosopher, said, I think, therefore I am. Kierkegaard, the existentialist philosopher, said, I think, therefore I am. We can paraphrase that to mean, I imagine, therefore I am. And because the imagination of the creative writer is free, is not confined, is not fettered, the creative persona is, number one, non-judgmental. Her perspective is, she never says, don't do this and don't do that. She's not into quote unquote proper or what is improper. She doesn't judge others. She lives by the motto, live and let live. Temperamentally, she doesn't sit on a moral high horse. She's not preachy. She doesn't lecture or sermonize. She embraces difference. Her creativity makes her embrace the other. She's not intolerant of difference. Sameness and uniformity bore her. She relishes diversity and variety, which is the source of her inspiration. And most importantly, creativity humanizes. The creative writer's imagination not only makes her a good artist or writer, it makes her a better human being, the best version of herself. As a creative artist, she roots for the underdog, right? The marginalized, the powerless. In fact, it is her calling to give voice through her work to the voiceless. वो दिन जब हम बोलते थे एक राजा राजाओं की रानियों की कहानियां जो होती थी, एक था राजा एक थी रानी, वो दिन गए. सच है कि दोनों मर गए, खत्म कहानी. अब जब नई कहानियां लिखी जा रही हैं, ये न्यू स्टोरीज आर अबाउट द कूली, द टैक्सी ड्राइवर, the housemaid, the outcast, the housewife, Dalit, the clerk, the urchin in the slum. The creative lens of the imagination of the creative writer is all embracing, all inclusive. It is universal and it is democratic. Another aspect of the creative persona is that he or she is anti-establishment. Historically, creative people, artists, painters, writers, musicians, because they challenge the status quo, because they challenge the boundaries, because they question the existing power structure, because they are anti-establishment, they run foul of the powers that be. They are rebels and revolutionaries of a different kind. Their weapons are far more potent than guns. Their weapons are the imagination and ideas, which it is difficult to jail or chain. The paintbrush and the pen are far more effective than any technology. So the imagination that refuses to toe the line, that refuses to conform. Little wonder then that the totalitarian states like the Nazis burned books. It should come as no surprise that all governments, while paying lip sympathy to freedom of expression, including creative expression, are hostile to and suspicious of artists. Because basically artists are free spirits. Creativity is not only an art or an artistic output or endeavor, it is the politics of the highest order, the politics of humanity. It is anti-authoritarianism. It is the politics of dissent. It asks questions. It conjures up and imagines alternative realities. It doesn't buy into state-sponsored truths or reality or propaganda. It knows that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So all true artists keep a safe distance from the corridors of power. Therefore, the creative imagination places you, the individual at the center. Yes, you are important. It is your creative expression that defines you, that makes you who you are, that gives you your own agency and autonomy, that liberates you, that makes you soar, that transforms you into a free spirit. Now, we are delighted and privileged to have just such a free spirit amongst us, Bulbul Sharma ji. She will be talking to us on the subject. She will be undertaking some innovative exercises in order to release our creative potential, to give us some tips, hints, and pointers on the process of creative writing and creative self-expression. Bulbul ji is a writer and painter of repute and renown, whose books and paintings and creative endeavors are enjoyed by many. Among her better known books are My Sainted Aunts, Birds in My Garden and Beyond, Murder in Shimla, and another book with a very interesting title, Murder in the Happy Home for the Aged. Now, these titles themselves are redolent of a very fertile imagination. So who better than Bulbul ji to guide us through this fascinating journey of developing a creative imagination, as well as the linguistic tools of putting that imagination to use through writing. It is wonderful that Bulbul ji wants this to be an interactive session rather than a lecture. So we are looking forward to some creative insights and questions from the audience. But before Bulbul ji ignites our imagination and reawakens the child within us, may I request our chairperson, Rashmi ji, to formally welcome Bulbul ji.
Thank you very much, Zal. That was so fascinating and so interesting and so inspiring what
Thank
you just shared with us. I loved what you shared. And in a way, we are all creative at Vidya. Each one is,
Yes.
in our own ways, are very creative. But thank you. That was wonderful graphics as well. And what a wonderful way to start this afternoon and inspire us all. Bulbul, we are absolutely delighted and honored to have you with the Vidya family today. Bulbul is a very old friend of Vidya's. It's not her first visit to Vidya. As you know, we all know Dr. Mandira Mukherjee, who worked with us very closely for many, many years. She is a sister-in-law of Mandira. And Mandira, of course, had brought you to Vidya even 20 years ago, I think, when she was looking after the Papan Kalan project and Bal Vihar. And of course, recently you visited the Vidya school, Bulbul. So for us, you are a very special friend of Vidya. And I take this opportunity also to offer our deepest condolences for the loss of Ashok Mukherjee, your brother, who recently passed away. Both he and Mandira were very close to all of us, and we felt like our own brother has gone. So I can totally understand what you're going through. Bulbul, you've moved closer to the Vidya school, yes?
Yes.
In Garden Estate, and we're looking forward to your coming down from this beautiful haven you're in right now and coming back to the good old grind of Delhi and Gurgaon once the lockdown is over. And we are looking forward to your coming to the Vidya school, which can be your karma bhumi,
Yes.
and bring in with our teachers, with our students, bring in all the creativity of which we'd love to learn from you, and our children would love to learn from you, not only in the arts, but also in the creative writing. We're really looking forward to for this afternoon to hear from you. And besides all our teachers, we have almost close to 85, 86 people here itself. We also have a few students with us today who are joining us. And I'm sure this will inspire many more to join you in the future. So on behalf of the Vidya family, a very warm welcome again, and look forward to this creative workshop with you. Thanks,
Thank
Bulbul. Thanks.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rashmi, and thank you everybody at Vidya for giving me this opportunity to talk to all of you. And as you know, we've been going through a very bad time in the family. My brother passed away, and it's exactly a month. So I hope they're all in a safe place and a happy place. And I'm sure he'll be very, very, very pleased that I'm doing some work with Vidya, like his wife Monbira had started. So, and also Rashmi, our family goes back a long, long way, isn't it? I mean, my principal was Rashmi's father-in-law, so we go back a long way.
Right.
So again, now to just say good afternoon to everybody, and I hope you're all in a safe zone. And what I'm going to do with you today is not teach actually, just share a few points with you as how I write a short story. And it's very simple. I hope you all got something to write, yeah, or paper and pencil. And these are very simple points, and I'm just going to deal with the short story format today, not the novel, as Mr. Zal very beautifully explained all the creative process. I was quite impressed. I never knew all these things before myself. Some of the things were quite helpful to me. So let us begin. Now, short story is something which you have to do everything in a very packaged, very tight format. You don't have the luxury like you have in a novel of thousands of words that you can do to, establish your character and do everything in a nice leisurely way. In a short story, you have to say whatever you have to say very quickly and very, very effectively. So there are 5 points that you have to really start with. So the first one is the most important, is who. So please write down who, in capital letters. And so, because of course, no story will exist unless you have your characters. So who is establishes your characters. Now you have to have more than 2 people for an interaction. Of course, there are short stories written in a very modern format where there's just one person talking, but we are looking at a more traditional way. So who? So you can have, say, if you're working, all of us are working with children and we're all teachers. So let's start with children, like writing a short story for a child. So we have two, boy and a girl. You have 2 boys and a girl, whatever you want. The 3 people is you must have minimum for a good interaction. The 2 people gets a little boring because you can't really do that much with just 2 characters. So 3. And what I generally do, I introduce 3 characters and an animal, because if you're writing for children, then best way to hold their attention is to have some kind of an animal. It could be a dog or a cat or some rare animal, if you like. Monkey is not that rare in our country, but in a lot of Western books you see for children, monkey is very exotic. So is that clear? Yeah, you got your who organized. That is either 2 or 3 people. You can have the parents coming in, but the main character should be 3, minimum 3 people. Then you have where. You have to establish where you're going to set your story in. Now, this is also very interesting because you can, in your imagination, like Mr. Zal said, you can go anywhere. That's the greatest thing about creative writing, is that you can fly to the moon, you can go anywhere. You can set your story in any place that you want. You can be, if it's a humorous story, you can be in some, like crazy place with a lot of noise and chaos. Or if you want to write something more serious, you can be in a quiet place. You can set your story anywhere. And it just doesn't have to be one place because your characters are mobile. So you start off, say you start your story in Delhi. Delhi ka you write everything about. And when you're doing where, just write in brackets, description. That's very important. You have to, take the reader into this where. Because if you just write, 2 people were in Delhi, it's not that, like say somebody's never been to Delhi. How does he or she know what Delhi is about? So in just few sentences, you'll have to describe Delhi, your Delhi, the one you're writing about Old Delhi, South Delhi, New Delhi, or some village in Delhi. You're writing about a Vidya school, wherever you're setting your story in. So that atmosphere about the noise, the sounds you hear, the little bit of color, the trees around with their no trees and what the buildings, what they look like. So in about 5 or 6 sentences, I forgot to mention in the beginning, a short story is generally 2,000 words, 2,000 to 3,000. can be longer, but then the normal format is 2 to 3,000. So in about 10, 20 lines, you have to establish your place. After place, you've established your who, the people, you've established your place. Yeah, is that clear? Then you come to when. Now, when in a short story is very exciting because you can travel anywhere you want. You can go to the hills, you can go to the seaside, you can go into a dungeon, you can go into a, sorry, that's where, when is where you can go into the future, and you can go into the past, and you can go into, present, but you can keep jumping. You can keep going in when to 3 places, 3 times. And most, for instance, if you're setting it in the future, then it becomes like a short, like a science fiction short story. That I have never explored myself, so I'll leave it to you. Many of you might be very good about that, because if you're writing about the future, you have to be a little careful and have some scientific knowledge. You can make it totally imaginative, but also there should be a little bit of facts. In all the stories that you write, just remember a little grain of, actual factual knowledge is very important to hold the story together. It can be imaginative, but you have to, like, if you're writing about Delhi, Delhi is real, isn't it? So, and the time you're writing, if you're writing about the present, then you have to establish a few things that are happening at that time. If you're writing about the past, then it becomes even more important, because you can't make up. You can't make up, but if you're writing, say, for instance, a historical story, you have to know. You can't just say the Mughals were in the, in the sort of antiquated time or something like that. You have to have those facts correct. You can't make up your facts. If you want to make up your facts, then you have to be totally imaginative and create a totally fictitious world. But you can't have, you can't distort historical facts or geography, any kind of geographical facts. So that's clear. So you have who first. We've done who. That means your characters. We've done when, the time you're setting in, and we've done where, the place you're setting in. So these 3, once you've established, this is you're building your skeleton of your story. Each step you have to keep adding adjectives, you have to add color, you have to describe everything very clearly. Then we come to the most important thing, is what? What is happening to these people? What are these people doing in this particular place? Say you have 3 people in Delhi in the present time. So what exactly are they doing? That's the core of your story, because that's where you really have to think, that if you don't establish, then there is no story, then you're just sort of putting the numbers down. So then you have to think, what are they happening? Have they got lost? Have those children got, going for some adventure where they've gone into some secret place and they can't be found and their parents are looking for it? Or are the children looking for something new to do and they have gone into some kind of it has to be something exciting and unusual. That what is really important, and what in a short story you have to really think about. And that's where often people get stuck, because it's very easy to start off with your characters. I've got 2 boys and a girl, and I've got a dog. I've set them in Delhi, or put them in Shimla, put them in the present time. But then what should I do with these? What should I do with these characters and situation that I have? So what is your core? What you have to think about a lot. And what helps me is reading a lot. We're sort of very fortunate to be living in India, because there's so many exciting things happening, or bizarre things happening sometimes, and sometimes very tragic. But at the same time, some really strange things happen that I don't know if you read. Since I'm in Himachal, I read the Tribune over here. And I read the other day, like this young boy who'd come home and unfortunately he got COVID, but he was not badly affected. But he lived in a very small, like, one room hut. He didn't want to infect his parents and the very other relatives who lived in that little home. So he built himself a little house on the tree. Now, I thought that was an amazing thing, and I immediately thought I'm going to write a story. If we're planning to do a series of stories for children, who've been stuck in this COVID situation, and that's going to be my story about this boy who built himself a house, and his mother used to put food in a tokri, and wo rassi ke saath she used to send it up, and that's how they kept social distancing. And he was there for 10 days. He used to come down in the morning at 5 o'clock or something, go into the fields and have a bath and do everything, and come back and again go and sit on the tree. But that's something like that. I think it only happened in India. Do you think so? So if you read the newspapers, if you talk to people, you get so many story ideas. They're really amazing. Our whole country is such a treasure house of stories. Both are ancient stories. You read the Mahabharata, you read the Ramayana. So many stories come out of that. You can make it your own. And like Mr. Zal said, your imagination is all that you need. You don't need anything else to write a story. You just need to sit there and think. And every story you write, I have sometimes a group of 50 people doing the workshop with me, but every story, though I give them the structure, every story is different. No two stories will be alike because no two human beings are alike, isn't it? So, what is that very important thing? Now, what we've solved, that what is happening to them, say we've said these two children and their dog have gone into Humayun's tomb, and they're looking for something that somebody has told them that there's some secret document in there. Okay, I'm just thinking out of. Then what happens is you have to ask yourself how. How did they find out? And how are they going to go there? And how are they going to find it? So once you've established your what, you have to, then it actually becomes quite simple because you're just working out logically. How will they go there? And they're small children. Can they just take the bus? Or how will they go there? What if they get lost? And in a story, it's very important to create problems. So say the children do get lost. And then do their parents come to look for them, or do they manage on their own? So in every short story, in every creative thing, even a novel, this series of problems you'll see, and especially if you see classical novels and short stories, is always something going wrong. And then in the end, it becomes right. And then you have a happy ending. To some of the great tragedy stories, things don't, become all right. But you have to have this kind of, like you start like this and you have to go up where the problem is, then you solve the problem and you have to come down. So it's like climbing a mountain. I'm sorry, I keep talking about mountains because I am sitting on top of a mountain at 7,000 feet. So all these mountain sort of images keep coming into my language also. But so that's all. That's it. Those are the 5 things you have to remember: who, where, what, and why, and how. So this is why we discussed why also is why is all this happening to them. That doesn't take long. That you just sort it out. The most important thing is who. That is your characters. Where, your situation. When, your time. And what. These are the most important things. We know what is happening to these. So if you write me a story, and as I spoke to Rashmi and to Ila, they both said it was, in fact, their suggestion that would be a good idea if you all write a very short story, like 1,500 words or something like that, or anything you feel like. And I would be happy to have a look at it. And if you have any questions, please ask me. Anything that you need clarification, and Yeah, yeah. Can we now go on to the questions now? That. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. There is this thing in abroad called show, don't tell while writing. Could you throw a little bit of light on that?
What is it? I'm afraid I don't know that. Show and don't tell.
That while teaching children story writing or
Yeah.
writing anything that is
Yeah.
descriptive or narrative, children are taught to show and not to tell. Show, don't tell.
So just an image? Just an image?
Yeah, no, but they say, like, suppose I was to say Rashmi ji is a happy person. Now that is telling, not showing. But if I was to say that Rashmi ji's face lights up on when she meets people, right? That is showing. And writers are encouraged in a way, young writers, to sort of make it graphic rather than, you know, take resort to abstract language.
Descriptive, yeah. You do it.
Yeah, yeah, which is very important, right?
Yeah, that's what I said. I mean, your imagination is what you need. Like, if you write a story with just giving the facts, then you're just writing in a straight line.
Yeah.
So you have to have highs and lows and descriptions. In fact, at one workshop, this child brought me a story with just 10 lines. And I said, you know, bahut thoda hai, aur bhi likhna hai. She says, don't worry, ma'am, I'll put at least 100 adjectives in. So she was, you know, she made a list of adjectives. But you have to, you know, description is the whole beauty of writing, is that you can really describe things, you know, to your heart's content. It's like gilding. It's beautiful. It's very, and the more you read, like you suggested earlier, the more a person reads, the descriptive powers become better. So I would suggest that anybody who wants to write, they should just read a lot of short stories and classic, especially.
And also, ma'am, I feel that sometimes we give too much of emphasis on grammar and the technical aspect of writing.
Yeah,
you know, it doesn't matter if you cannot write the Queen's English or absolutely grammatically correct English. So long as you have an imagination and you can express it, I think we should encourage our children to write, regardless of the grammatical mistakes that they make. And, you know, if they can't, they don't know where to stop a sentence, where to put a capital, where to put a full stop. It's okay. That will come with time. That's a technicality they'll pick up. Isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, not grammar thing. In fact, in Western school, if you notice, the children can write whatever they want to. I was amazed. I was doing some workshop, and the teacher did not correct a single spelling mistake. Because the story was excellent and it was full of grammatical mistakes. But in India, unfortunately, you know, your red line is put through all your spelling mistakes. So
we give so much of importance to the technicalities and to the grammar rather than to the, you know, the substance of storytelling.
Yeah, right.
Any questions from members of the audience? Bulbul ma'am? Anybody wanting to ask a question?
Yes, so there is a interesting question by Sanjana.
Yes,
who has asked, what about audience, ma'am? Could you please address how to keep the audience in mind while writing?
Yes, that's a good question. It's very important. First of all, you have to, writing for children, you have to establish your age group. That's really important, because what you're writing for 8-year-old will not interest a 12-year-old. You know, their interest changes very fast. In fact, it happened to my own grandchildren. I was telling them a story, and they're twin. I have twin grandsons, and they said, "Dadi, I think you should upgrade your style," because I was telling them very childish stories, and they wanted, you know, something much faster and more action-packed. So I was shocked. So that is very important, that you have to have your target audience in mind. The same book will not do, the same story will not do for 8-year-old. And children are very quick to dismiss. You know, if they don't write like the first paragraph, they're not going to give you a second chance. So that's important. Your target audience is very important.
No, but Bulbul ma'am,
your language changes.
Is this important for children writers, or is it what about the adult writers? Sometimes they are accused, that
Yeah.
they have a particular particularly the Indian writers writing in English, that they cater to a Western sensibility and a Western audience, because they are at the back of their minds is the sales of the book, and therefore they're not true to their own situation or reality.
Yeah. Well, the adult writers are accused of all kinds of things. They're accused of, whatever you write, some critic somewhere will say that she's writing for this audience and that audience. But that doesn't matter so much when you're an adult. When you're writing
But ma'am,
for children.
my point is, should an audience, I'm not talking about children's writers, right? Should in the mind of the writer, should an audience be in his mind while writing? Or he should just tell the story regardless of, who is being addressed or who's likely to read it.
Yeah. I feel that I taking, if I, speaking from my own personal experience, I just write. I don't really have an audience in mind. I'm often translated to various languages, and they keep asking me questions about what is this, what is that. So I don't make it easy. I don't make it like friendly to the Western audience. If they like it, they like it. They don't. With them. But nowadays, a lot of young writers who have a target audience. They write for a certain, like a young crowd. They'll write for the young crowd that live in cities, urban areas. So nowadays, publishers also are very market savvy.
Yes.
So they will put your book, replace your book. Okay, this is it. This is it.
Yes.
And so everything happens in the publishing world, but you just have to write on. And for children, you have to know your audience. That's for sure.
Okay, I have a question.
I
have a question. How do you develop a style of writing that evolves over time, and you perceive it differently depending on the time period in which you're placed and the circumstances under which you're placed? For example, now Zal mentioned Alice in Wonderland. Now, when I read Alice in Wonderland as a child, I was absolutely awestruck. But when I read it as an adult, my whole perception changed. And there were such profound messages that came across in, Alice in Wonderland. I mean, you wouldn't imagine Alice being psychosomatic. You wouldn't imagine Alice having, well, I don't use that word, but getting delirious and having mental problems and being, inordinately imaginative, because Alice was every child's fantasy girl. So, so what is this kind of writing that your style evolves and people perceive it differently? The same story is perceived differently depending on your age, right? So as you grow in maturity and probably the circumstances in which you're placed. Now, if people were to read Alice in Wonderland during the pandemic, they would perceive the whole story differently. So it wouldn't be so much of a fantasy, and Alice in the, through the magnifying glass and going through the tunnel. So, they would say, yes, life is so unpredictable, and maybe life is a dark tunnel, and they see no light at the end of the tunnel. People who are, on ventilators, critically ill, how they would relate to Alice in Wonderland in a totally different way.
Right.
Yeah. So could you just elaborate on that? Is that a particular style that somebody develops, or is it something that just, comes off and you just write? Because
I think it would just be very good quality writing that stays throughout. That's what classical, the classics are about, that you read them over and over again. Each time they will speak to you in a different way. If you read, like you mentioned Alice in Wonderland, as a child, you just look at the fun stuff and the imagination of the rabbit, and as you grow, exactly what you said. When I read it now,
and to add to what Bulbul ma'am said, writers talk about. You use the word style, Diluba ma'am, but the writers talk about the voice of the writer, right? And sometimes it takes a writer decades and years to acquire a distinctive voice of her own. For example, I'll give you one example. This Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie.
Right.
Before that, he had written 2 books that were unremarkable. But in Midnight's Children, he developed a distinctive voice, and he broke the English language up into its, the way English is spoken over here. He called it the chutnification of English, and the book is full of the sights and the smells and the colors of India. And therefore, this book of his was so different from the books on India and about India by Indian writers that come out earlier on. So this question of a writerly voice, which is unique, which is distinctive, I think the writers themselves grapple with this issue, and sometimes it takes them years of writing before they acquire a distinctive voice of their own.
Right. And sorry, just one more question that came to my mind was that, I see a lot of Indian writers using foreign names, in their stories, which I don't think they should be doing. Instead of using Indian names, they're using names like Jack and Jill,
But,
and, which our students can't relate to. So I know there is a movement not to use Western names, to Indianize the names so that children can relate to them too. I hope that's happening increasingly. That's one. And another question that I have, do you think nursery rhymes like Ringa Ringa Roses should be taught to the children? Because when you delve into the significance of Ringa Ringa Roses, what are they referring to? It's terrible. They're referring to the plague. When they say, Hasha, Hasha, we all fell down, they're referring to the plague when people died in millions. Should these nursery rhymes be taught to our children? It's a given. In all schools they're taught. And I've raised my voice at workshops and said, scrap these nursery rhymes. Because, at some point in time, children will want to find out, what exactly is the inner meaning. And the moment you tell them you're referring to the plague, is that what we're teaching our children?
Well, your first question, I agree with you. Like every time I do a workshop with children, children writing, they always use Western names. And I have a real tough time. And I get very annoyed sometimes. I said, can't you do Indian names? And one little girl came up to me and said, ma'am, I don't know any Indian names. I was shocked. I said, what do you mean? I said, what is your name? So she said, a beautiful name. So I said, put your own name. She said, no, in storybooks is all English name. And that is a fault, because for many years, like when we were growing up, we were just reading Western, books published in England most of the time, because our own publishing was not so good. But now it's changed. Fortunately, the young children now have excellent books published in India, like Pratham, like Talking Cub, and there's so many Indian publishers, Puffin, they bring out books that are meant only for Indian children. So I think that Indian name, I agree with you totally, that I make it a point that I don't want any Jack in any of my, workshops. And the second, you're talking about nursery rhymes. Now that is a very mixed thing. For instance, if you take our own literature, Bengali literature, there's a book called Thakumar Julie, which is grandmother's bag full of stories. And you don't know how violent they are. I mean, as a child, I used to love them, but later on, I would not let my own children read them, because I said they'll get nightmares. They were frightening, full of blood and fighting and killing and horrible things, legs being chopped off and put in a basket and things like that. But children loved it. So many people think it's there, it was the original, if you see the fairy tales, how violent fairy tales are. Fairy tales are not like things that they really, Aesop's fairy tales, all of them, they're really violent. So that is a really difficult thing to understand. How much should a child be protected, and how much should a child be allowed to deal with all this in a storytelling format?
I have a question here, Bulbulji. I'm Pratima Goyal. Should there be a message at the end of each story, number one? And number two, I feel personally that a writer, whatever that person is writing, is reflective of the environment or the circumstances to quite some extent. Like if stories are going to be written now, maybe many of them would be about the situation we find ourselves in. There can be stories which escape from it also, but I think the writer should just sort of enjoy the process of writing without thinking of anything. But should there be a message in every story? There usually is.
Well, I find writing for children, I don't put any message because I find most of the stories written in India, unfortunately, have too many messages. Remember as children, I don't know how old you are, but I, as a child, every story I read had some moral tale about some
Yes, that's why I'm
good
asking.
boy, and I hated them. I said, I want stories about naughty children. I want stories
Yes.
that go wrong. Somebody does something wrong, and then he learns the right way. But there shouldn't be a message कि ऐसे ही करना है, तुम ऐसा नहीं करोगे तो बहुत बुरा होगा तुम्हारे साथ. So my I'm allergic to messages for children's. And of course, my novels don't have any messages at all. At the
Sometimes I
moment, I
find
might sneak in a little bit of description about nature because I'm doing a
Okay.
series of short stories for children, which are nature mysteries. A child
Okay.
goes and solves a mystery, but gets into the natural environment. So, but no
and I
message.
find that the children react to some stories in very unexpected ways. Like today,
Right.
during a storytelling session, I saw the kids, my grand twins. There was a story about the owls losing their mother. The mother went away, apparently
Yeah.
to get some food. And
Yeah.
one of them got so upset, he went and hid behind a curtain. I said,
Yeah,
"What's happened to you?" He said, "I'm scared. Mama is going away."
Oh, they get very upset. Even my grandson, he was 13 when we were reading something, and he just got so upset. He ran to my
Yes.
daughter, held on to her, and said, "Mama, aap kahin jaoge to nahi?" And we
Exactly.
didn't realize that it was, and it was a funny thing. It was a hilarious story. But you don't know
But
I
what.
think maybe the impact of the story is very
Yeah.
often what the reader's psyche is.
Right.
So,
And what that frame of mind you're then.
yeah,
You're right.
yeah.
So,
And with
Bulbulji,
children,
what
you have to be
what
very
I wanted to
careful.
ask is that okay, there should not be an overt message, but sometimes there is a message that children or the readers derive from the story itself, right? And that is not a bad thing
In a subtle way. You're
in a
right.
subtle way, yeah.
Yeah.
And they can derive their own meanings. Two different readers
Right.
read a same book differently.
Yeah. Something like simple like cruelty to animals or,
Yeah,
looking after the environment. And those are messages, like you said, if you can do it with humor, you can make it fun, but not this good behavior, bad
Preachy.
behavior.
Yeah.
Ma'am, we
We
have
have a question here from
we have
Sanjana.
another question from the audience.
Right.
Yeah.
She says that some writers use very flowery language while others prefer simpler words. How do we maintain the balance while using vocabulary in your story?
I think you should just be very honest and use the words that you really are familiar with. Don't use flowery language just because you want to impress somebody and say, oh, I know so many words, big words. I would recommend just using words and the words that are suitable. Whatever you're describing, it should, jabardasti, you can't put a big word in it because you said, oh, wow, it looks good, I'm going to put this word. It has to be, you can describe something in very simple terms also at the same time. So words are like your friends. You have to treat them with a lot of respect and use them accordingly.
Thank you, ma'am.
I have a question. You talked about Thakumar Jhuli, which
Yeah.
you said was your, my grandmother was also a Bengali.
Yes,
And I
yes.
remember listening to these stories and they were very nice. I don't know whether we ever went into the in-depth thing about them being very cruel and all that. But I was wondering, do you have any sort of translation of those things nowadays? Or do they have anything similar?
They don't have Thakumar Julius, but they have Tuntunir Boy, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
But they're quite sweet.
Abol Tabol.
Abol Tabol, yes.
That's
But they're
great
very
fun.
sweet. I mean, they
Yeah,
were very sweet. And I don't think as children we went into this in-depth thing of them being cruel. But now that we've grown up, we see them as being
You will
very
see it
cruel.
now, you'll see, you
Yeah.
never thought of, I don't know if any of you have read this politically correct bedtime stories, which some American group, I mean, it's a fun thing. You should read it, Rashmi. In fact, I think you'll enjoy it. Is they've taken all the classic fairy tales and they changed the ending. to suit
Okay.
all, because in America they're so particular about
So
offending
about,
any group.
yes.
So like for instance, the wolf is not killed because the animal right people said you
Oh
can't
my
kill.
God.
And the grandmother is not called old because the ages.
Because
And Red Riding Hood has blonde hair, so you can't say anything about her. So she has to. So it's really very funny because you could
The-
carry it to an extreme.
yes.
The dwarfs are not called dwarfs, they're called vertically challenged.
Yeah, you've
Wow.
seen. You read that,
So that way,
Wow.
even they say, no, why should Rapunzel be rescued? Why can't she manage on her own?
Oh, you're
So-
right.
So
Another very nice book called Don't Bet on the Prince, where they've taken all these short fairy tales, and the main character is the witch, and the prince is always being rescued. He's always in some trouble, and the princess goes. So, you can turn it around. I mean, that's the great thing about the craft of storytelling.
Thank you.
I think, if an ordinary person like me, we try to write a story, I usually don't know where to begin. I mean, there are many things I would like to say, maybe your experiences, but I'm at a blank if I start to begin. You have any cues on that?
I tell you what you do. You write a diary. I tell children also to do this, that just sit down and write every day. Don't write don't get self-conscious that I'm writing this to show to my teacher or to show to ma'am or something. Just sit down, get yourself a nice, treat yourself to a nice diary and write your random thoughts every day.
Okay.
Like you said, experience, what your memories. Memory is such a storehouse.
Memories,
Yeah, that memories is the best thing that you can. And I'm always stealing when I run out of my own memories. I'm catching hold of my friends, and they get upset. They said we don't want to tell you anything because next it'll be in a story we've written about. So other people's memories, talking to people, listening about their shared stories, and put everything down in that diary of yours, and you'll love it. You'll love reading it afterwards. You'll see, and something will come out of it. A beautiful story will emerge.
I really marvel at the ones who write those thrillers and all. How do they think of the plot and all the details and everything? It's fascinating, actually.
I can tell you it's a lot of hard work. I've done only 2 murder mysteries, and I was so exhausted. I told my editor that I'm not doing anymore because you have to be so careful.
Of course, yes.
Details.
You've heard of Alexander McCall Smith, this very amusing writer. So I was at a workshop and he was giving a talk, and he said, I don't like writing murder mystery stories because you have to remember the end and the beginning and you have to match it. Because, he said you can't write about somebody in the beginning who's died and suddenly on the 10th chapter he comes alive. So it's
a lot of hard work. Yeah.
It's like maths. If you're a maths teacher, any of you will be able to write murder mysteries.
Yes.
Because Sara plan karke, you have to know exactly.
Like a mathematical puzzle.
Right. Yeah. So it's
and now during the pandemic, I believe they did a survey. They found that murder mysteries and thrillers are the most popular genre because people wanted to forget the world without and just be lost in a book. And what's better than a thriller or a murder mystery?
I don't know, for me personally, I'm just going back to the classics. I'm reading Jane Austen, I'm reading all kinds of, Charles Dickens, because that's so soothing and it's so far away from what is happening around us.
Yes.
But that is, Bulbul ma'am, that is also because you're focused on language, on the style of writing, whereas the murder mysteries are driven by plot. And most people are interested by the plotting, but what happens next and who the killer is or who the murderer is and the clues that the writer cleverly
takes your
throws
mind off everything else, the mundane problems and everything. Yeah. You're wondering who the killer is and how they managed it.
And in the short story, I forgot to mention this, is that, you have to keep sustaining the interest on this who, why, when, everything. The main thread that links it all is ki aage kya hoga. Somebody should know what is going to happen to these people. If you
and another good thing about murder mysteries is the mystery writers, what they do is sometimes they take characters from real life whom they don't like. And normally they are the ones who are bumped off.
Zal, I want to see you writing a murder mystery.
I wrote half a mystery short story and I ran out of steam. in which the main character
I'd
is
like to
bumped.
know whom all you knocked off.
I'm not
You
telling.
know,
You should
What
write historical murder mysteries. That's a beautiful genre.
Yeah, but that requires a lot of
If I had the
research.
knowledge, I would have done that.
There is
no,
this
what I
writer.
enjoy, what
There-
I enjoy reading are satires, parodies,
Yeah.
Oh,
you know,
yes.
spoofs. I think it
Yes.
calls for a great intellectual
Definitely.
bent of mind to write a good satire.
And
So,
in India, you can really do it, you know. But, yeah.
There's this writer called Madhulika Little.
Yes,
I don't know whether you've heard of her or not. She writes
Yes,
these murder
I have.
mysteries set in Mughal India.
Yeah, they're very good. Yeah,
Very
they're
good.
historians. She and Swapna are both historians, so you know they have the knowledge. They know how to do it.
The bottom line is that everybody has to read. So that is
Yeah.
what you have to encourage,
Yeah.
I think. among
Very
the
true.
children
Yeah.
To
You can't
read
write unless you read.
Yes.
But then if
And
you have
Can't
if
write,
every-
at least read.
diary entry is very important to help
Yeah.
them to express their feelings on a day-to-day basis. If they learn that, that is a very good beginning.
but if you want them to read, you have to take this away.
Yes.
Yeah.
They should read actual books, feel the
No,
paper, and smell an old book particularly. That will transport them to the different realms.
And
no,
you need
I
to
have
read
a different, you know, I have
read out
a different point of view. I feel that anything that you read enhances your linguistic ability. For
Absolutely.
example, as children, we are told not to read comics because that would, you know, spoil your language. But I think there was so much to the comics that we read. And if you read Asterisk, I don't think it really spoils
used
your
to love
linguistic
Asterix.
ability. So, you
It
know,
was so good.
I think, right. So there's
Also-
so much of depth, even
Also,
in comic
I
strips that
think
you read,
I think
because
it's counter,
it has an underlying message to convey, or even if it doesn't, it just livens up your spirits. And, you know, you drift into a different world. So I think
Also-
children should be allowed to read
Of course.
anything, as long as it's not porn and obscene.
Yes.
it is
Anything
it is
that
counter,
enhances their
Sorry.
spirits and,
it
you
is
know, helps them to
counterproductive to force
become
children to.
imaginative and think creatively. I think
And it
that's
is
what
coun-
we're all
It is
aiming at.
counterproductive to
The
force
children should be able
read,
to
I feel, right?
bend down their
If you
thoughts
force children to
unfettered.
read, they're not going to read. Right? So many times we make the mistake of forcing children to read or telling them, read this, read this, read this. You just
Right.
have kids running around. How many parents today visit a bookshop with their children? Right? Or take their child to the library or themselves read. How many homes do you find books lying around? Right? For the child to pick up on his own. Because I feel the moment you force a child or instruct the child to read, the child won't. Particularly in today's day and age when he has far more visual attractions to catch his mind.
And he can read anything, actually. There's so much of visual, digital work that he can read. So I
Yes.
think a child just be encouraged to read whatever comes his way.
Now you have
It can
ebooks
be a
also.
recipe that the mother is following. Why not just write a recipe down for the mother? You know, even that will help to build some writing skills.
Yes.
And I feel there are not enough books for children of from a different background. There are a lot of children books for city children.
Yes.
But, like over here, when I do, I often go to the school now. It's shut, but my daughter and I do workshops in the school here now, little village school, and there are no books I can give them except for some Hindi books that Pratham has produced. There's no book that I can give. Even simple, they can read English, simple English books. And like you said, they're all Jack and Jill and things set in Switzerland and abroad and all.
The Kharadi tales are quite nice.
Yeah. So now, fortunately, now when they open again, I've got a library organized for them, which I'll do. So there's a terrible storm.
Rashmi written.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it's 4:00, so we should be ending now, no, Ila?
Yes. We are getting so carried away with the discussion that we have
This
lost
is such
track
a
of
lovely
it.
topic.
Can't we have 5 or 10 minutes more if Bulbul ma'am
You're
doesn't
all
mind?
interested and you're all participants, you're educators. So it's so important for all of us to be in this together.
There's an
Unfortunately.
interesting question, just if anybody would like to voice it out. Somebody has asked, before writing any
What kind of
story,
question?
what kind of questions we should ask ourselves?
Oh, that is the I've actually never asked myself any question. I just sit down to write. If I start myself, if you start questioning too much, then it sort of, at least in my personal thing, if I'm doing too much questioning, why should I write? Shall I write it? Shall I write it like this, like that? It takes away from the spontaneous, the whatever flowing words you'll have, the words that will flow easily. So don't
if I may
think
ask
too much.
it,
Just write.
Maybe,
At what age
maybe
did you
Bulbul,
start
you could
writing?
say, sorry, maybe, the WH questions that you mentioned, maybe those are the questions the child could ask before contemplating writing the story, that whom am I going to write about? Where is it going to be set?
Yeah.
Those are the questions, I suppose.
Those are the questions, but first of all, he has to think that he wants to
Yes.
write. That
Yes,
is the
that
main
he wants
part.
to write, correct.
Hindi
And then he can
likhna hai,
start.
and because once he does that, I'm sure he's thinking that because he's already got something to say. It works like that. And so the main core is that to see something interesting around you and say, okay, I want to write about this. That spark should be there. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to write unless you have.
If I may ask, Bulbulji, at what age did you start writing?
Well, I actually started writing very late because I was basically a painter for many years. From a very young age, I was painting professionally. And I started writing a column for a newspaper. I wasn't writing fiction at all. I was writing about, doing sketches and writing about people who made a living from working on the street. There was a newspaper called Statesman. I was writing for them. And I was very fortunate because some publishers saw those writings and said, would you like to put them in a book? So while I was doing that, I had gone to a wedding in Calcutta and I was telling my editor about the wedding. And he said, okay, now put this book on hold and I want you to write about this wedding incident. Because it was chaotic. It's called My Saint Dance. That book eventually came out. It's about women in my family, how they traveled and how they behaved. It's really, I don't think my family was very happy about it because I really made fun of all of them. Every Indian family, it's like all of you could write that. The Bengali families are, of course, even I think more crazy than normal Indian families. So that spark has to be there, that you have a story to tell.
Actually, I think the writers have a way of looking at things. I mean, what you would notice, perhaps another person would not notice. The humor in it or the descriptions. You have to have that.
Like Mr. Zal said, everybody is creative. It just depends on your circumstances, whether you've been allowed that creativity spark in you to flourish. Due to circumstances, maybe you have to lead a very life where you're a scientist or something. You have to be like fact oriented. So then you haven't had the chance to let your imagination go. Like once I used to teach in a school with Salam Balak Trust at the railway station, and I used to do art with children. I wasn't doing storytelling, just doing painting. And one day this big hulking gunda fellow came, and I really got scared. I thought he was going to stop this, because they really bully the children. And all he wanted to do was paint. He asked me for a sheet of paper, and he was like a real Hindi movie gunda, and a gold chain and all that. And he just wanted to paint. He said, "Jab main chota tha, to main bahut drawing karta." And he sat down and painted and painted and painted. He finished up all my crayons. I was too scared of him to ask for them back. So, I just felt that every human being has this spark of creativity, and it's just circumstances that some of us have are fortunate enough that you can just write and be free and do that. And some of them are overtaken by life, all the difficult aspects of life.
Right.
Like they say, all of us are poets. Only the poets use words.
You're all poets and you're all painters. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just sit down and do it. Write that diary. I
Okay.
promise you will love it. Everybody can write a diary and share it amongst your, with your friends, close friends, and be open to suggestion. Don't be
Yes.
afraid. Don't be too touchy. I'm constantly being criticized. People come to me, total strangers come to me. I've written this book called Anger of Aubergines, where there's a story about this girl who's like a poor relative, and she helps all the people in the family, and everybody's dependent on her. And suddenly she gets a marriage proposal and she refuses. So this lady came up to me and said, "ये आपने बहुत गलत किया, उसको शादी क्यों नहीं करने दी आपने?" Like she has attacked her in some way. So be open to criticism.
Yes.
And enjoy. Just main thing is
Yeah.
to enjoy what you write. Don't be
Absolutely.
self-conscious. Don't try to impress anybody. Just enjoy.
Write for yourself.
Yeah. Write for yourself.
Just be yourself. Yeah.
You said it very well. Who said that?
Yeah.
I don't know who.
That's Meenakshi. I'm Meenakshi Roy.
Meenakshi.
Meenakshi, well said. Just write for yourself.
No, but
And
how
I'd love
important
to
is
see. Do take my email from Ilaji, and please write to me anytime. I'll be very happy to.
I think, yeah.
I
We'd
will.
love to.
And the students who have, who joined, please ask them to write.
And Bulbulji, one last question. How important is commercial success for a writer?
Well, nowadays is the most important thing. You know what happens when we given a manuscript now, that unless it's sellable, very few publishers now. I'm fortunate to have a publisher called Speaking Tiger, who are very good. They publish things which they think are good, and they're not that overly concerned. And Penguin also that way is very. But abroad, it's really tough. People there, their writing just goes straight into the marketing division. Before the editors see it, the marketing people see it.
Yeah.
And so commercial success has become very important now. But I really admire the writers, like say in the 1920s, people used to just write, for magazines, and thank God that they were these magazines who published them, because otherwise we would have lost all Premchand's early writing, Manto's early writing, because they just got, I think, a few rupees and they got published in these journals.
And another thing that I feel very strongly, why should we be reading books in English? Why can't we have translations of our vernacular literature, of our regional Malayalam or Bengali?
We
or
do now.
Telugu? Now we
do. Yatra.
And Marathi literature.
Yatra books. Publishing is very expensive. I mean, so people, they try their best. The publishers have to really struggle. Bookshops are struggling now, especially with this COVID now. There's so many bookshops have shut down, but still they're carrying on. They're very bravely carrying on. So it's up to us to buy books and to read.
And books have become very expensive.
Yes. It was so lovely, Bulbulji. Thank you so much for giving up so much of your time. And we've just thoroughly enjoyed it, as is evident. Everybody's
Yes, we really enjoyed interacting. Yeah.
No,
Thank you, ma'am.
Vidya is so close to my heart, and I really admire what you all are doing, and it's so important. I wish there were many more Vidyas all over India to help. And,
hopefully your talk will have inspired at least 1 or 2 or 3 people to take up the pen and write.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Maybe we can bring out a Vidya short story competition or something.
Yes, why not?
Yes.
Yes, that's a good idea.
That should be
I'll be very
interesting.
happy to give an award. Yeah, I'll give
For the teachers or for the children?
Both.
Everybody.
Both.
Teachers, actually. Yeah, for the teachers.
That would be a good idea.
So let's do
And let's not give a topic, just let's write anything.
Yeah, but
no. Topic becomes an essay then.
Yeah,
Doesn't
exactly.
It has to be your own. Let's do it, okay?
Okay,
Yes.
thank you so much,
Thank
Bulbul.
you, Bulbul ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
very much.
Lovely
Thank you,
session.
sir. Thank you,
Thank you, Bulbul ma'am.
Bulbul ma'am.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Thank you
so
Hina,
much.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Sal. Thank
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir. Mr.
Thank you.
Dawar, very well.
Thank you,
moderated.
Meenakshi ma'am. that
Thank
article
you so
that you wrote on the coconut was very interesting, by the way.
I'm going to send that to Bulbulji, I think.
Yes.
Yes, do that. My
Bye-bye.
email ID you can get from Ila and then. Yeah.
Thank you, Zalston. Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Nehala, you can end it now.
Thank you, Ila ma'am.
I hope
Thank you,
you
Nehala.
send us all the emails.